Oh, hey folks, how you doing? Paul with you. We're gonna do some perfume reviews because I got tons of it. I ordered 600 bottles of perfume, which just came in, and I had to take 3 boxes and make them into 2 boxes because the perfumes are about the size of my thumb. They're half ounce, which is 15 mil, and some have boxes and some don't have boxes. And we're going to see if my wife can turn a profit on those. It's difficult because they're small, but we'll see how it goes. Now, what I wanted to do is I wanted to find out, why are people so mean when it comes to Muslim perfumes? For God's sakes, folks, I'm going to tell you a quick story, okay? The Muslims have been very slow to catch on to things as far as humanity, okay? They've always been a primitive type of people that have been savage-like. I'm sorry to say that, but that's pretty much the way it is. But why do you have to be so mean to them with their perfumes? I mean, they're masters of perfumes. They always have been. There's documented cases of women that were just like afraid of these sultans and were comforted by the smell of this, and they were taken for things that you wouldn't want to go into right now. But the Muslims have always known what they're doing because they've got this oud, O-U-D, it's called oud. And it's very, very tough. I know, and if it's not done right, I know it is kind of tough to deal with. But for God's sakes, folks, the Muslims, one of the funniest stories, I told this on my last channel. They had, back in the time of about, I guess it was during the Vikings age, around 980, about 980 after death of Christ. They used to have what they call flea markets, and they had them in ports where there was a port, so the ships could come in, because at the time it was very difficult to transport things by land. So typically boats would come in to a port and you'd have something like a flea market arrangement. And the Muslims had to teach the Vikings and the Norse culture, because the Vikings just didn't understand culture. They had gods that they prayed to that were savage, and the whole nature of the Vikings was that they would plunder, kill anything in its way, young, old, or whatever, and just take whatever you had and move along. That's essentially what the Vikings did. They were pretty much nomadic, but not always. But they would just continually ravage, including churches, by the way. And the only way the churches could stop them was to completely clear out. And they had people looking out for them, because what they did was the churches were ornate and had a lot of gold. Their walls were gold in some of the churches. And they actually painted them white so that the Muslims didn't know that that it was gold. So there were all sorts of chicanery and nonsense. And it was up to the Muslims to show culture to these savages, Norse. So the Norse, the men would come in to these ports, and they'd bring a kid's pair of shoes, you know what I mean, like they weren't Buster Browns, but I mean they were at the time, right? And they would, of course, bring in some battle axes and some shields and some armor and some spike balls and so forth and so on. I mean, this is what they did when they plundered. And they went down to these ports with their ill-gotten gains, and they would, try to trade, purchase or trade. It was basically trade at that time. So what they found out real quick was that the Muslims were not stupid. And the Muslims kept the good stuff on the ships. You understand? With only a small amount out. So, and it always made me laugh. It's like, one of the funniest stories, in my opinion, because of human nature. You're dealing with savages here when you're talking about the Norse. I know that they were religious, but, they'd howl and they'd do this and that and the other thing. They were not very peaceful people by any means. All right? So the Muslim men basically would go to these flea markets on the port. And, they bring what they thought was absolutely wonderful, which were battle axes and, all this kind of stuff. And, at that time, the Muslims kind of said, well, we'll take it, but, we're not going to give you a whole lot of money or like a whole lot of trade value for battle axes and swords and this and that. It wasn't what the Muslims wanted. They were already cultured. And they knew about women wearing beautiful jewelry and so forth. And what made it so funny was that, like, the Muslims had to teach them, the Norse. So the Norse would come over and have, 3 carts full of armor and this and that, and clubs and this and that, swords. And the Muslims would look at them and they'd say, all right, we'll take all of this right here and we're going to give you a little pearl that big right there, the size of that tip of that pen, and it's going to have a little chain holding that up. And then, the Norse would say, we know about these. I might be exaggerating. It might be a pearl a little bit bigger or some kind of a precious stone. And, the Norse were kind of savvy about it, or so they thought. And they said, yeah, we know about this. We know what this is. Our women wear these during, rituals, right? They're magic and so forth. They're praying and all that. And they would prefer to steal it, is what they really wanted to do, is steal it. And the Muslims were savvy to that completely, and they left most of that stuff in their ships with very limited amounts of things. Stand by, folks. Sorry, folks. I have to get my train of thought back. So the Muslims essentially cultured the Vikings, and essentially that was their teachers. There was a lot of teachers, but essentially the Vikings, nobody really knows what happened to them. Essentially, they all became business owners, is essentially what happens. They became merchants, and they gave up all the plundering, and that's what they did. But during that time of like 900 AD, or maybe a little bit later than that, these ships would be pulling in and shortchanging apparently shortchanging these Norse, because they didn't like to give away all of this very useful battle axes and chainmail and all this other kind of stuff, for these tiny little pieces of jewelry that they would have much preferred. They were okay on having it, but they would have much preferred to plunder it and steal it or overpower them, but the Muslims were too smart. And they had a hard time understanding the concept of a woman just wearing that with her husband or with her man. And that's what the Muslims did. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to show you, and I always thought it was funny because it must have gotten to the point where, these Vikings, probably brought in a whole train full of carts of axes and all this kind of stuff and footwear and this and that and all plundered stuff, and the Muslim giving them just a little tiny little diamond or something. It's pretty funny when you think about it. But anyways, Why do people have to be like that? You know what I mean? Why do they have to be like that? So let me show you what they're saying. I got two examples if I can find the second one. Now, I want to buy this, okay? And oud is a type of wood, and it's a very odd-smelling wood. I will admit, I've smelled oud before, and if you get the real cheap oud, it's not real good. I admit that. But even the really good oud is prized for its real stiff nature, and some people don't like it at all. I found that women don't like it. That's what I found. Women do not like oud in their fragrances. Okay, that's what I found. There's exceptions, of course. So, there's one here I want to buy. Okay, and it's called Amber Malaki something or another, and I'll read you the notes. Okay, Iris, which is going to make you smell like an Egyptian, right? In the olden days, right? Warm and spicy, powdery, earthy, woody, patchouli. Okay. I mean, it's going to be an okay fragrance. It's going to be full of oud, right? That's what the name of this one is. Amber Malake Ashka Perfumes. And then it gives the whole thing here about, what it does. It's a woody, spicy fragrance. It was launched in 2024. Top notes, spices. Middle notes, orris. Base notes, patchouli, cedarwood. And it's grounded. So it's going to be a male perfume. Because I had told you before about that Penthouse. That Playful is not grounded. It has no wood. The only thing they're doing is vanilla bean, I think is what they talked about there. And that's not a grounding agent, in my opinion. So after I looked at all the stuff here, right, you go to the people's comments because you'd like to see, if this is, they give you the whole rundown, is it male, is it female? The gender on this one is going 5 more male and 1 unisex. So take it from there. This is pretty male. And then I get to the things here. And like I told you, if I could find this, I'll put it on pause and see if I can find it. Okay. I'm reading this to you verbatim, okay? Worst blind buy I ever made. The only fragrance that I have hated with passion. And this is Mark, okay? So I assume this is not a woman. I'm going to read this to you verbatim. It says, imagine. Can you see that right there? Imagine. I'm reading this verbatim. Imagine taking a shit and getting some on your hand while wiping. Then you scrub it off with the Irish Spring soap to the best of your ability, but the smell doesn't go away. This is what it smells like. And that's from January of this year. Okay? Well, no shit, dude. Do you know anything about oud? Do you know anything about the culture that the Muslims brought us? Do you have any idea? Huh? Did you ever see some of the finest, the oud, which costs tens of thousands of dollars for a very small amount, and the people smelling it, and you can see them grimacing in literal pain from the smell of the oud. Okay? Now, there's one more. Oh, I know what it was, if I can find it. I'm going to check it out. This is another one that was absolutely awful. How can people leave this kind of message? You know what I mean? This kind of prose for people to hear and read. Hold on. Okay, folks, I believe I found it. To those of you who are not in the know, Halston makes a nice perfume that's loved generally by men. The Z series, Halston Z14 or whatever it is. It's Z14, and it's a citrusy kind of nice smelling perfume. Unfortunately, they came out with an offering in 1976 called Halston I-12. And it has to be a certain type of man that can wear that, because to pull it off is like putting a garbage truck on your body, and that's kind of the way it is. It is such a weird smell. I would wear it because I appreciate where these designers are going and what they're trying to do. I could still wear it and I could still find appreciation for it. But of course, people would probably not like it. So I'm going to read you the review on this. And again, I think it's terrible what they're saying about this, but deserved in some way because Halston, you know what I'm talking about. The I-12, that one that came out in 76 that people got for Christmas every year in 1976 through probably 1984. You know what I'm talking about? And the bottle was huge. It was like 8 ounces. And I mean, this stuff, you put on a good handful and rubbed it on your face. And I mean, people weren't going to get near you, typically. So let me show you the review of this, if I can find it. And, you know, some of the people here say that they've used it since they were 17 years old, and et cetera, et cetera. And it ranges, okay? And then you have 1 star there, not very good at all. You know, this is a highly versatile and masculine fragrance that can be worn all year round. Yeah, because the garbage truck picks up every week, right? So you're going to get that smell. It's going to be a familiar smell. Husband lives this classic cologne with its unique scent. Okay? All right, this is the one I'm talking to you about. I have to read this verbatim, okay? Why would somebody come on and say something like this? We're going to have a little fun today with perfumes, okay? We're going to have a little fun. I prefer Z14. This smells exactly, and you call me a racist, right? A lot of people get mad at me. They say I'm a bigot and stuff, right? But I've never written anything like this for the perfumes. I mean, I might call them some names, right? But, I mean, it kind of in jest, right? I prefer Z14. This smells exactly like a Japanese man in Tokyo's toilet. A type of clean smell that implies filth in its squeakiness. Kind of nauseating as a perfume. I mean, you really got to do that? You really got to put it like that? And I kind of get where she's going, because anybody that's been to Japan at the airport, or China, or any of those Chinese airports, including Taiwan and stuff like that, they still have squat toilets, which, like, it's new for us Westerners, but they have like basically a hole in the ground, and you squat down and you just aim for that, and I guess you clean up. Or they have a shower thing. They're called squat toilets, and they prefer to use them. The Orientals, the Chinese and the Japanese and the Koreans and so forth, they tend to. I'm not sure about the Koreans, but I know the Chinese do for sure, and the Japanese some, although they've advanced, some of them. So there's my little thing for you. All right, you got a little lesson in how the Vikings tried to plunder the Muslims, but the Muslims were too smart for them, and took advantage of them and sold them little jewelry, and made them understand that it wasn't just for ceremonies where you were howling like a this or that, that the women would actually wear them. So, during daily affairs. Anyways, take care, folks. We have to have a little fun every once in a while, right? Take care, subscribe, be nobody, and I will be here with you again tonight. We'll do a little perfume review if I can. Bye.